Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tamara here. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamara Lewis, and I am the Senior Manager of State Policy and Legal Affairs with SchoolHouse Connection. I am joined today by my colleague, Patricia Julianell, who is the Senior Strategist for Program Advancement and Legal Affairs at SchoolHouse Connection. Patricia, do you want to say hi? Or I see you just joined us.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our meeting today. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time to join us.
Awesome. And Patricia, if you can, do you mind monitoring the chat throughout the session?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So we want to know who is in our virtual room today. A link that I just dropped into the chat is for our virtual whiteboard. So if you could, please sign in and let us know your favorite summer activity. That's just a little icebreaker for us. And then we will go ahead and get started in about a minute. Okay. I saw someone who noted there may not be editing access. Okay, give me 1 second.
I can work on that, Tamara. If you just want to keep going, I'll open up the access.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Patricia. So as a reminder, our community of practice sessions are recorded, and so they will be available to review after this session. Our community of practice sessions from March and from May are also linked in the virtual whiteboard in case you're interested in viewing past sessions as well. So I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint and okay, and Patricia just shared that everyone should be able to edit the document now. Thank you. Okay, so this is SchoolHouse Connection's third community of practice session. Today, we are discussing best practices in state advocacy with partners from the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. A little bit about SchoolHouse Connection. We're an organization working to overcome homelessness through education. We provide strategic advocacy and practical assistance in partnership with schools and a number of other service providers. And on our team, we have, of course, our state policy team. We also have a federal advocacy and policy team. We have staff members who work primarily with young people regarding scholarships and engagement. And then we also have staff members who are dedicated to working on issues with higher education and also with early childhood education. Our state policy community of practice does have a Facebook group, so please be sure to join if you have not already. And an overview of what our community of practice has discussed so far. So we really wanted this to be a space for advocates across the country to learn some basic advocacy skills if they had not had that training already. And then for those who do have more experience advocating on a state and local level, we wanted to provide an opportunity to sharpen those skills, and then also to connect with providers that are in your state, but perhaps in a different city, or providers that are across the country, but still working on issues that are relevant to you, and therefore can be a resource for you in that way. Our future sessions include our August breakout groups, and those are going to be centered around your role, your title, your position, responsibility, the last week of August. And then we're also having best practices in local advocacy in September. We're going to close out the year in November, reviewing what we have discussed already, and then some takeaways that we can apply to the community of practice for 2022. All right. So now that the document is able to be edited, I would love to read some of the comments of what folks have shared so far. All right, so Chandler shared his favorite summer activity is floating down the river. Melissa, one of our presenters today, her favorite summer activity is hiking. I also see painting, kayaking, cookouts. Nice. This is great. Okay, thank you guys for sharing that with us. Okay, so today we are discussing best practices in state advocacy, and we are joined by Arash Kapoor. Hi, and Melissa Jacobowitz from the Nevada Partnership for Youth. NPHY had major success in the Nevada legislature, and Arash and Melissa will walk us through the specifics of their campaign, how they were able to be successful, and what is happening now post-legislative win. And so to start the conversation and as a way to hear from our members, I want to pose the following questions to the group, and I'll include these in the chat as well. You can feel free to unmute yourself to answer, or you can answer in the chat. The first question is, if you have been a part of, or have you led an advocacy campaign in the past? And it could be with a focus on a state legislature, or even if you were part of a national coalition, we would love to hear about that.
Lima, if you feel like unmuting yourself, I see you said, yes, I have in the chat. If you feel like unmuting yourself and talking about that, we'd love to hear more. No pressure.
Yes, I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can see me, but yes, I have, but I think the better question is, did we win? And the answer is no. So a few years ago, I worked with an assembly member, Rob Rodriguez, out here in New York to introduce the first ever state legislation on culturally responsive teaching. And I worked to galvanize, myself working with the coalition, we galvanized teachers, students across the state to advance the legislation. But, you know, while organizing, you see just how challenging it is when you have state house that introduces over 11,000 bills annually. So you know that these things can take years. So I had to weigh the cost and benefits analysis about like, do we continue to push or do we move to a local scale? So I started to do working for the city council to work on the policy side to get things passed internally. So I didn't win, but it was really exciting to work with our members and work with just organizers and advocates across the state.
Thank you for sharing, Kalima. So ultimately, you all decided to take a different path in your advocacy. Was that successful ultimately?
So ultimately, I think what happened was because I got a job at the council in the middle of our organizing efforts. So I was able to advance, like I work with the council. I worked on a pilot proposal for culturally responsible teaching. It got picked up by the speaker. And then with $500,000, I presented. And then the next year, the mayor put $24 million into that pilot proposal that I brought to the council. But that was through the policy side of things. So I have a lot of learning to do about like, how do you, now that I work on the outskirts, I work for Education Trust New York, how do I galvanize people across the state, work with coalitions, build coalitions to win on the outskirts? Because I know how to do it when you're working internally. I've done it before, but on the outskirts, it's really hard. So I'm here to learn.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Kalima. Okay, I also see that Paul has not, and so he's looking to learn. He's looking for some guidance. And MJFF shared they have worked with Michigan policy regarding homelessness. I'm not sure if Michigan policy is a specific organization or if you just mean you've worked on Michigan policy issues. But
hi, my name is Sharice. The organization I represent is Mothers to Joy Family Foundation. We're working on a advocacy for affordable wages for Genesee County, and also the homeless. There's been a lot of things pertaining to homelessness that is making it where people are being evicted prematurely. So yeah, that part. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Sharice. All right, so the second question that I'm going to pose to the group is, how did you identify possible solutions to your advocacy issue? And that could be was that through coalition building? Did you already kind of come to the table with those solutions because you had been working with homeless children, youth, and families?
It looks like Lisa is willing to share some thoughts. And Lisa, if you want to unmute and jump in.
Sure. Hey there. So hi, everyone. I know some of you, but not all of you. So I'm actually a consultant and I work on child welfare, juvenile justice, youth homelessness, and then other sort of child and family issues. And so a lot of my work is actually just supporting like state advocacy campaigns or national advocacy campaigns. Sometimes it's about finding the right data or like helping them write a report that makes the case. Sometimes it's more about strategy. Actually, a lot of what I do tends to be, let's talk to, 5 or 10 people who were successful in, changing their state's law or advocating for a change. And then let's think about like, what were the strategies they shared? What were some of the things they had in common? And then kind of sharing that back out so that other advocates can use those methods. So I'm excited to be here and happy to kind of chime in as I see things that might be helpful, even if it's from another field.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Lisa.
Of course.
All right. And I see Stacy shared. Stacy, would you like to unmute?
Hi, good to see you all. Stacy Violante-Cote from Connecticut, the Center for Children's Advocacy. And we had a 100-day challenge. At this point, I think it was 2 years ago, since last year is a blur. And we have 7 homeless regions in our state. So we did 100-day challenges in each region, and the teams consisted of frontline folks and young people. And so that brought up very specific issues, one of which was young people saying they didn't have access to their birth certificates and state IDs in terms of having access to jobs, access to housing, and all the things that people need those identity documents for. So we started looking at our state statute for both of those and state regulations to see what was in statute and what needed to be created, and then started pursuing a legislative advocacy campaign at the end of 2019, and then our legislative session is in the first 6 months of the year. So started it in 2020, which was suspended. Our legislative session was suspended, and then we resumed legislative advocacy to create a fee waiver process this session, and that passed by the end of our current legislative session. And so that did 2 things. Our Department of Motor Vehicles state ID regulations had a specific definition of homelessness tied to being in shelter, which was not helpful for young people. So we expanded that definition to the McKinney-Vento definition. And then there was no fee waiver for birth certificates. So we tied the birth certificate process to that definition for state IDs so that they both mirrored each other. Yeah. And we were successful on that front.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing, Stacy. I'm sorry, I'm just reading Patricia's message about some of the young folks who are on our call. Okay, so my last question before I hand it over to Arash and Melissa is if anyone has any advocacy tips that either in your first time doing this sort of work, you just realized like this is something that you're so glad someone shared with you, or if this is work that you've been doing for a while and you've kind of built up this knowledge base and you think it would be good to share with someone else, we would love to hear those suggestions.
I think I'm just going to unmute if that's okay, instead of typing a very long answer. So I know that every single person on this call knows the importance of having young people share their experiences in a way that is, comfortable and affirming for them. But I just want to kind of say that I'm actually writing a report right now about a juvenile justice law that was changed, and multiple people that I interviewed, and I'm talking about the policymakers, not even the advocates, said that the thing that really motivated them was when they heard from young people like how bad the system was and what wasn't working for them. So just to kind of share back that, I heard from policymakers that really does influence them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think if I can build on that, I think relationships is really important. So what relationships do you have with the policymakers? What relationships are you fostering with young people? And what relationships are you fostering with other coalitions and people that's doing this work? I think relationships go beyond just, saying hi or, we met in a meeting, but it means like going out for coffee, learning about folks' self-interest, and also just checking back in to manage the relationships and continue to have those grow.
That's great. So from Lisa, I heard just making sure that there is youth engagement and storytelling from the young people who these policies are impacting. And then from Kalima, I heard just making sure that you are fostering and maintaining mutually beneficial relationships. Would anyone else like to share? Okay. All right, so I am now going to turn it over to Arash and Melissa. I am so happy to have you both present today. Nevada had a huge win, as I mentioned, And so I'm going to allow Arash and Melissa just to tell you more about it, about the specifics of the campaign, and then where they are now in the actual implementation and kind of compliance process of all of this.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see so many faces and texts of names that represent faces, and especially to our young folks who are also attending, as Lisa has said, and we will reiterate, your voice and your presence is really the most important part of our work, and especially when it comes to policy. My name is Arash Kapoor, and I'm the CEO of Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. And Melissa, if you want to introduce yourself before we get started.
Sure. My name is Melissa Jacobowitz, and I'm the Chief of Development and Strategy at Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, or NPHY. And basically how we're going to share our information today is Arash and I are going to kind of have a conversation where we're going to share some of the details of how we went about the process of getting a law passed in the most recent legislative session, and provide hopefully some concrete details, especially seeing what everybody's been kind of asking and sharing. It sounds like people might like some concrete information of like exactly how you might go about this process. Of course, different in every state, different in every place and context, but we're going to just share some of our details of how we've had some successes. So hopefully other people can kind of use that to pick and choose pieces to maybe create a model for their approach as well. So yeah, we'll get started, and I'm going to start by asking Arash a question. So yeah, Arash, could you tell us briefly about NPHY and how and why our organization began getting involved in policy work?
Sure, Melissa. This is totally natural to have a conversation with you on Zoom like this. So our mission, I'm just kidding. Hi, everyone again. So we're Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, and our mission is to end youth homelessness and its wide-ranging, devastating effect, not only for young people themselves, but for our community as a whole. We are a largely comprehensive and holistic direct service organization, and we are rooted in advocacy, as our agency helped pass the right to shelter law in Nevada about 20 years ago, which permitted us to open our doors and begin serving unaccompanied minors and young people experiencing homelessness. Getting into policy work is a very interesting story, and it really relates to our mission. In order to meet our mission, we feel that we must attack the issue of youth homelessness from all fronts, ranging from high quality direct services to policy and systems level contributions. Our mission demands that we do everything we can to get to our goal. And we saw a leadership void in our community around systems level reform, coordination, ideation, and common goals. So we launched a movement to end youth homelessness in Southern Nevada, Melissa, by convening a summit and announcing the first order of business, which was a year-long endeavor to collaborate with over 40 local and national partners, including young leaders, to create the first ever local plan to end youth homelessness. This plan created a North Star for our community and allowed us to coordinate around common goals and concerns. The plan included 5 identified focus areas, including policy initiatives, which related to the objectives and strategies outlined in the plan. Since launching the movement, NPHY has gotten a Nevada state law passed in each regular legislative session that's occurred. In 2019, we got a Vital Docs law passed. I think it was Assembly Bill 363, which removed administrative and financial barriers for young people experiencing homelessness to access vital identification docs. And this year, the governor just signed into law recently a healthcare access law that we'll be discussing today. Melissa, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Go ahead. Thank you. In order to focus today's discussion on this year's legislative session, can you tell the group a bit about the process of how we identified healthcare access as a need and a good fit for this year's legislative session, and how we started working on a bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that's really interesting about the way that we identified the need for a healthcare access bill this year in our legislative session was actually that our direct client services staff came to us with a barrier that they were facing, right? And that is, I think, whether it's case management staff or direct client services staff, whether it's young people, whoever is really on the ground in the field having those experiences, that is a fantastic way to identify policy needs, right? And so in Nevada, we had this kind of odd law on the books that allowed unaccompanied minors to access medical care only if they had been homeless for 4 months or longer, right? And or had been separated from their families for 4 months or longer, and had some other issues with the law. But that really was becoming a problem again and again and again. At Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, we do serve minors. We serve a lot of minors at our programs, and so when we have a lot of really wonderful healthcare partners, different healthcare partners that wanted to provide services to the young people that we're serving, but literally felt that they could not because of the law, whether they were confused by how the law worked, whether they didn't understand how to actually access the law if a young person had been homeless for 4 months, or whether there was just the young person was newly homeless and newly had just been separated from their family and was in a situation where they immediately needed care, that they had that barrier and were blocked from being able to serve them. So our case managers were coming to us over and over and saying, we have minors in need of medical care that, and even though we have these great partners, they're unable to serve them because of the law. So that was really how we kind of identified this barrier. And then we also, of course, looked at the Southern Nevada plan to end youth homelessness, which Arash introduced and explained, and that this need was very aligned with policy strategies that were already identified in the plan. So accordingly, because we were hearing from our direct client services staff, we were hearing from young people, and it aligned with the systems level work we were already doing, we thought that this was a great, this was not only a barrier that people were facing, but it was a barrier that was directly related to policy. And so accordingly, we looked into the policy. And basically another thing that helped us with our decision making on how to pursue this year was that we looked at, what the environment was in the current legislative session, right? And so obviously, of course, with COVID and with everything that's been going on for the past year and a half, or almost 2 years at this point, we knew that healthcare access was something that our legislature was going to be focused on, was very interested in, that there would be other efforts around healthcare. And so therefore, we felt that that was a good fit for this session. In addition, we also knew that pursuing something like this, which is basically getting rid of a few requirements in how, how doctors and other providers of healthcare are able to serve young people, just getting rid of some barriers and how they're able to serve, as well as making the process clearer, cleaner, more understandable, et cetera, that would not result in a fiscal note or result in any cost to our state, right? And so knowing that, especially back when this legislative session was first starting at the beginning of the year, there were a lot of questions, of course, here in Nevada, but everywhere about, state legislators not having the resources to really fund a lot of initiatives. And so accordingly, we also thought it was a good fit for this session because it didn't have a fiscal note and it was tied into a topic that was already of interest to the legislature and to the community. And so therefore we thought this was a great fit for this session. And so once we did that analysis, then we also worked with SchoolHouse Connection. So we came to Patricia, and who was always unbelievably helpful with all of the policy work that we've ever pursued. And so we came to her with this idea and we said, what do you think about this idea that, our direct client services staff has identified and our young people have been facing, and how do you feel about this, and do you think this is something that we could pursue? And she said, I think this is a great idea. And she helped us to look into the exact legal language and then helped us to draft bill language to be able to actually have that available when we went to a possible sponsor to present this, right? And so we worked with Patricia, and she helped us draft bill language of, what changes would we make to the law on the books to improve it for our young people. And then to make sure that we had all of the feedback that we needed from the actual, consumers of this law, we held a focus group with our young people. And so we held a focus group, we had direct client services staff participate as well. And we had a group of young people in a variety of our different programs, as well as in the different leadership youth groups throughout our community participate in this focus group. And we went over the actual draft language with them to see if they had any feedback on anything that was missing or any unintended consequences that they might have noticed or seen or anticipated, or, any challenges that they saw, or, just anything that they thought could be improved in the concept of the bill, as well as the actual bill language. And so we had that focus group that was very, very helpful. We got their feedback, and then we brought that back to Patricia, and she helped us, craft further language from there. And then that is really kind of how we settled on the structure of the bill and the details of the bill, to be able to then go search out a sponsor to then actually go on to the actual legislative advocacy campaign. So yeah, that's just a little bit about how we identified the need and the fit and kind of got that process going. And then so once we had this really concrete idea for the bill, Arash, could you let the group know, how we went about that legislative advocacy campaign to get the bill actually introduced and then eventually passed?
Absolutely, Melissa. I'd be happy to, but I'm just reflecting on all the amazing things that you were just saying. And I just want to reflect with the group that if you're a direct service organization or anyone else on this call, I just want to highlight the importance and potential of working with direct service organizations around policy change and policy reform and policy efforts. It's, we think, critical because we can identify those needs on the ground, and we also have some of the consumers on the ground that can help help us really understand what needs to change and how it needs to change. So we're not doing this in sort of a silo and then going back and trying to get information after the fact, after the policy changes already occurred on, hey, will this really work or not? So we want to do all that legwork in advance. And I think that it's great for everyone, if you're not a direct service organization, to partner to get to know direct service organizations that can really contribute to this kind of on the ground level, on the ground sort of forming policy change. So just want to highlight that real quick. But yeah, happy to kind of talk about how we kind of went about getting this bill introduced and eventually passed. So I'm going to outline some steps. The very first step is you should get to know Patricia Julia now. I'm just kidding, but I'm really not. It's a really important thing. But the very first step, minus that, is to actually find a bill sponsor. And that's not always as easy it may appear. I kind of met our bill sponsor at an event. He was just a freshly elected official. We did not know much about our mutual work at all, but we took that opportunity the first time meeting to just ask around a bit about his priorities and goals as an elected official, especially since he was a freshman. And through that conversation, we could definitely see that we're really like-minded in some of our goals. I also shared at that meeting that MPHY is very interested in policy, and we want to contribute. But it wasn't just that. We explained to him how critical policy work was to moving the needle for young people experiencing homelessness in the right way and more expeditiously. And we also kind of added that not only is it a good, we could have good ideas, but we're positioned to help through our connections, through our resources, through being a direct service organization, through working with organizations like Schoolhouse, with National Network for Youth, and countless others. So after meeting with him, we kind of came back internally, Melissa and I and some others, we did some internal research and around kind of what his policy priorities are, and noticed he's very active around human rights, housing affordability, and anything and everything that has to do with creating more equity for our state. So we right away were very excited about this opportunity to eventually forge a longer term relationship. So I would, MPHY would keep him updated regularly whenever we could on anything that we were doing related to sort of advocacy, whether it's more on the ground, whether it's more regional or even local. We always just try to keep him informed, to signal to him that not only are we really interested, but we're backing it up through action as well. And that led to him feeling comfortable inviting us to an event he was doing. He's actually organizing a protest to protest a a temporary law that our local city council passed that was not very favorably received in our community and with our young leaders, and of course with this elected official and some others as well. So we participated, we ordered young leaders, we made statements, we really showed that we took the pride in coming to these things and working with this assembly person on these matters. And that again helped kind of forge the relationship a little more. And that let him know that we can come to the table with sort of ideas and actions. So this actions kind of and dialogue that we had with him set the stage for us making our ask. When it came time to find a bill sponsor, I have to tell you, it was a very nerve-wracking time. As someone else on the phone earlier said, in their community, there's several thousand bills introduced in a legislative session. In Nevada, only meets once every other year for legislative activity, so every 2 years. And of course, we're meeting in the middle of COVID when there's 20% budget cuts across the board and all kinds of local crises and state crises happening. So BDRs bill requests were not very easy, and bill sponsors were not very easy to find. Luckily, through our relationship with this assembly person and through the history we had, and through identifying, as Melissa mentioned, a topic that was really salient and timely for the state of Nevada, we felt we had a good ask. We went and talked to him, and he was more than excited to come sort of help to lead those efforts with us. So that was step one, to find a bill sponsor. Step two is you got to work with the bill sponsor and an identified young person, as people mentioned on this call, to craft the bill presentation to committee. I have to say that also what helped us land a bill sponsor is not only having a good idea, but showing the bill sponsor that we as an agency have the package of tools and resources that will help get the policy idea to the finish line. So we offer to organize the subject matter expertise, legal expertise, the necessary research, and young leaders for the bill sponsor. This led us, I think, also to help us secure the bill sponsorship on top of those relationships. But for us, when it comes to bill presentation, we found a very successful combination in keeping it short, simple, and smart. Our formula for bill presentations to committee was to incorporate the bill sponsor the agency leader or subject matter expert, and the most important voice, a young person who can speak to directly as to why this is important. We keep the presentation short and focus on the matter at hand, yet we do our research in advance and anticipate the type of questions or opposition that we may receive. That way we in advance can go talk to subject matter experts, to legal experts like Patricia and many other folks to anticipate what we can say to make sure that we can reach consensus and drive this bill through. So step 2 is really keeping that bill presentation, and I'm sorry, working on that simple bill presentation formula. But I have to add, finding a great bill sponsor is critical for this, because you don't just want an elected official who is going to come up to the table and introduce you. You want an elected official who also understands the content, who also is passionate about pursuing this change and is willing to go to bat to you and when it comes to answering any questions or concerns from the opposition or others. So step 3 is to build a coalition to provide additional comments and testimony in a public comment period, and also to provide written testimony as well for the record. Elected officials on both sides of any issue want to see and hear from stakeholders. They want to see that your bill, I think someone may not be in mute, but I'm hearing intense feedback. Hello, 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 test, test, test. That went away. Awesome. So anyway, elected officials on both sides, they really want to hear and see from stakeholders. Not only do they want to see that the bill is important to you and your population, but they want to see that it's also important to other intersectional stakeholders that elected officials may be doing business with in other capacities or working on other bills. So we want to make sure there's that surround sound positive support for our bill. And hearing these additional perspectives is a critical part of your bill presentation and getting it successfully passed. So we want to seek out a variety of partners to help support the bill. And we want to do this by leveraging ones that you already have, people that you already work with, which I'll explain in a second, and or creating new ones. Since this bill was specifically for medical access for us, we also wanted to get the support of the medical community, because as Melissa explained, not only is this something to eliminate barriers for young people, especially unaccompanied minors, accessing vital medical care, but also we wanted to remove barriers and any hiccups in the chain for medical professionals to easily and without confusion provide that. Right now, before this law, there was a lot of hesitancy in medical professionals that wanted to help, but didn't want to get in trouble or didn't know how to do it or didn't know if they're how they could identify or what the process was. So it's very important that we educate the medical community on the positive benefits of the list law for their work as well. And that's exactly what we did. We already have direct service sort of collaborative relationships with our local university school of nursing, our local medical school. We also have a relationship with our local federally qualified health center that comes and provides mobile hospital services to our drop-in center on a weekly basis as well. So we tapped those and other medical professionals that we had connections with. But in addition to that, we wanted to get broader medical support as well. So we sought connections and made an appointment with the Nevada Hospital Association, which oversees, it's a conglomerate of most hospitals in the state of Nevada. And we wanted to get their support as well to really show legislators how big of a deal this is, not just to us as a direct service provider in our community, but also to the medical community for the entire state. So not only did we do that, but we also wanted support from broader and important coalitions. So we asked our local homelessness policy council. We asked local homeless advocate groups. We asked casinos. Why casinos? That's a random one for people outside of the state of Nevada, but they're the biggest industry in the state. They're the biggest employer, the biggest workforce and economic engine in our state that's on the private side. So it's very important that if casinos support something you're doing, then that shows that the largest representation of employees in the state, et cetera, and one of the biggest economic engines is also in support as well. So we wanted to ask them, we asked our donors, we asked progressive policy action groups, we even asked local jurisdictions and others to validate the importance of this bill. And the last step really quick is that we must inform and educate key elected officials on the bill prior to and while it is in the legislative process. So this is a really great opportunity for anyone advocating for a bill change. The presentation is really, really important. Getting those additional broadband support and surround sound voice is really important. But getting those one-on-one opportunities where you can sit down in a very informal setting with a young leader and an expert and talk very informally with the elected official about the importance of what you're doing, why you're doing it, having them get a chance to hear from young people directly and informally, and most importantly, allowing them to ask questions that they may not ask in front of a committee, so that you can make sure that they understand as well as you do, because elected officials just want to understand something really well and feel comfortable talking about it. So that's what the mission is during these meetings, is to really introduce what you're doing, what the policy changes, why it's so important, and trying to relate it to their work and in their language as much as possible. And that will help you get more support as it comes time for votes and things of that nature. So we went about in our community, we had a local advocacy group create an event called Housing and Homelessness Awareness Day. And we participated in the event. And then that event allowed us to set up meetings with key legislatures, utilizing those advocacy days to talk about our bill and what we wanted to do, and also provide a small opportunity for us to show and express our support for other really important bills that were happening in our state around youth and school district discipline, around affordable housing, and a slew of other really important bills to us in this legislative session as well. So those are kind of the 4 steps. In summary, again, finding a bill sponsor, working with the bill sponsor and an identified young person to create a simple yet smart presentation, building a broad coalition of surround sound voices that can support your efforts and validate the importance of your work, and 4, trying to set up meetings with individual key elected officials that can help you drive your bill successfully through the legislative process. So that is, to answer your question, Melissa, a little bit about how we went about creating, introducing the bill and getting it successfully passed. So with that, I do have a question for you, Melissa.
Sure.
Which is, tell us about the most probably important thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is how critical were youth in this process?
Absolutely. Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, of course, we had young people involved in the crafting of the bill. Well, let me even take one step back further, that we had, when we created the Southern Nevada Plan to End Youth Homelessness, young people were very, very involved in that process. They sat on the decision-making leadership group that really made the final decisions around that plan. Our local youth action board was one of the subcommittees to create that plan that was meeting on a weekly basis to give input into that plan. They sat on all of the committees that gave input. And again, they were really leaders in the process. And 20% of the strategies in the plan were created directly by the young people, and then they gave input on every single other strategy and helped hone them. And they created the benchmarks and the data and the goals and the vision, and we're very involved in that process in the first place. So years ago, when we created the plan in 2018, that was the first step of involvement in even coming up with these policy ideas or having these policy objectives in the first place. And then like I said, when we had the idea in the first place, it was feedback from both direct client services and young people who had encountered barriers in accessing healthcare. And then when we're moving forward on the bill, and when we had bill language, then of course we had our focus group with the young people to give feedback on the bill language in the first place, before we ever shared that with ever shared that with a possible sponsor or any partners out in the community, right? The young people gave that feedback first, so that once we went to that sponsor, we had their feedback already incorporated into there. But in addition, Arash mentioned a couple ways that they are involved as well. Of course, our bill presentation, where we present to committee and share our bill, which is very, very important, just as Arash mentioned, because that's the first time that the members of the committee are really introduced to that bill and are considering it. Absolutely, having a young person be a part of that presentation is critical. Can't overstate how important that is. So, and of course, that means working with a young person to be prepared for that, making sure that, identifying a young person who is willing and excited about it and wants to participate in that, who has some personal experience related to the content of the bill, and that they feel comfortable sharing that, and then working with them to support them in whatever ways they need. Obviously every young person is different, so depending on what that individual needs, whatever help that they need in prepping, whether it's helping them outline, or helping they outline and then you help them flesh it out into a full presentation, or anything like that, like just working with them, supporting them, being available, talking them through it, answering questions, making sure to provide them that any support that they would like or need to be prepared for the bill presentation. But in addition to that, Arash also mentioned meeting with individual legislatures, whether it was through Housing and Homelessness Awareness Day that we participated in, or whether it was through setting up meetings on our own. Young people also joined for those meetings as well. And that is also very important. When we participated in Housing and Homelessness Awareness Day, we made sure to always have at least one of the two of us and one young person attending every one of those meetings. So in order to do that, and then that's another thing that we prepared with the young people. We split up the content as the young person was comfortable with and as would be successful. And so we also prepped for those meetings, and then we had those meetings together with young people, with the legislators. But in addition, we also worked with young people on some additional ways and some supplemental ways to also support the bill. So one thing is that our community, of course, like many community, oh, I see a question here. You say young people, what is the age range you include? So MPHY as a direct service provider, we generally serve ages 12 through 21, though we're actually about to expand our age range up to 24. But when it comes to the youth leadership groups that we support, MPHY has our own youth leadership group called MPHY Ambassadors, which is current or former clients of MPHY. And then we also support and co-facilitate our community's youth action board as well. So both the youth action board and our MPHY ambassadors goes up to age 24 or 25, depending on the group. So those are the ages that we're talking about. And so we also worked with our local youth action board and asked them if they would be interested in writing a support letter for the bill. And they were interested. And therefore they wrote a support letter that, though they didn't present because just one young person joined for the bill presentation for a flow and all of that, they wrote a letter of support that was submitted into the record before the presentation and was available for the legislators to see during the presentation, during that committee meeting. So we also worked with our local youth action board to write a letter of support that they submitted. And then in addition, once the bill was kind of being heard by the full assembly, and then when it was being heard by the full Senate, et cetera, we also worked with some young people in our leadership groups to create videos for social media to encourage the public and people in general to reach out to their own legislator to convince them to support this bill. And they could have done that in two ways, right? So of course, you can always email or call, of course, your own legislator. Or Nevada has on our legislature's website, there's a submit an opinion section of the website where you can just go on. It's very simple and easy. And you could just say, you write a bill number and you say, I'm in favor or I'm opposed, and you can write a comment. So the young people made videos talking about why this bill, this healthcare access bill, was so important to them, why it affected them, why they felt that other people should support it, what a difference it would make in their lives, et cetera. And they made short social media videos that then we pushed out on our social media with the goal of asking people to either fill out that form on the legislative website or contact, as a constituent, for people to contact their own legislator. So that was another way that we worked with young people just to get the word out about this bill and this advocacy that was needed. And then the one other thing, which Tamara was kind of asking about at the beginning, is, so now that the bill is passed, of course, that now that it's law, that really is only the beginning of the work, right? It's very, very important to really get the word out about this, right? Because this, a law is only as good as its use, right? And if it's just sitting on the books and not being utilized by people, and people don't realize that the law has changed, then all that work that we did is, not accomplishing what it needs to be accomplishing, right? So accordingly, getting the word out is very, very important. When we passed our law in 2019, that was about vital documents and breaking down barriers to vital documents, like Arash mentioned earlier. We worked with Patricia, of course, to hold a webinar that was a statewide webinar where we worked with, that bill had to do with the DMV and our Office of Vital Records. We had presenters from DMV, we had presenters from Office of Vital Records, we worked with other providers, but especially with young people, to present on a webinar about how to utilize the law, how to actually use it. And we also created flow charts and graphics that we house on a website that MPHY operates as well, to make sure that providers and young people can access that and know what their rights are, et cetera. And for our healthcare access bill, which just passed recently, we're also working on a variety of approaches to get the word out about that, working on another, most likely, kind of virtual education component, also some virtual advocacy, et cetera. We have a lot of ideas for that, but young people will be very involved in all of the efforts to get the word out about this. When that's getting the word out to healthcare providers, that's getting the word out to young people themselves to know they can go to a doctor or a dentist or a psychologist, or to anybody that now this law is expanded to include, and access services and what they need to get to be able to access those services. So it's spreading the word also to service providers like MPHY, other groups like us, and other service providers, even providers of foster care, or other providers that are working with young people who might be unaccompanied, and working with them to be able to know that they can access healthcare now in a way that they couldn't before. So So yeah, that all young people are so incredibly important, right? Youth leadership is so important to drive this process, to be able to do all that. Link to the new law. Yes, I will provide a link in just a second when we finish speaking, or Patricia will.
I got you, Melissa.
Perfect. Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, that's a little bit about that. Arash, would you like to add anything about that, or anything else that you want to leave with the group?
Yeah, before we go to the next portion, I don't know if it's Q&A or what, but I just want to add a couple things to kind of point out a couple things. One, I just want to say when it comes to youth, I mentioned this at the very beginning, we all have, but they're the most important critical part of this. Not only is this for them, but without them, I don't think these processes would be as successful. And even if they are successful without them being involved prior, during, and downstream, like Melissa just said, the law may not be implemented correctly or used as well. So they're critical. And I just want to mention that we can have a whole day seminar, just like we talked about how to go about kind of finding a bill sponsor real quick, about how to even work with youth in these situations, because it's not, one, we compensated youth for everything. And two, I just want to point out again, the advantages of working with a direct service organization in this context is that we're establishing with these relationships with young people, not with the specific intent of having them go help us with policy or anything like that later. We're establishing relationships, and we make sure different departments that are not direct service, not focused fully on programs, have connection points and have positive adult mentorship and other type of opportunities with our young people internally, so we can sort of build relationships, so we can make sure that one, we know our young people and that we're already working with them on other things. Two, that we can ensure that this stuff is presented in a non-intimidating and a very accessible way. That way we can work on all the things that Melissa said that are specific to engaging a young leader around policy working. So I just want to point out that that's really so important, but it's not like we just go grab a youth and say, go say these. We make sure to incorporate their voice, their word, their thoughts on the policy. Someone, I think Patricia mentioned earlier in the chat, I love it when the young people catch mistakes in our policy ideas. And this is so true. They are a plethora of information to help inform us on exactly the how of something's going to work. Even if we know what the issue is, the how is something that is critical to bring young people to the table for the entire part. So I just want to mention that first and foremost. And second, I just want to say that this presentation, I'm kind of pinch myself when I think about it, because I want to stress that anyone can do this, no matter how big or small, but especially small. We are a small direct service organization by measure of budget, by measure of other organizations in our state and around the country. Just this time, a few years ago, we were less than a $2 million budget, and the overwhelming majority of staff, 85 to 90%, are all programmatic. So this is not something where we have an entire advocacy department, an entire policy department working on this full time. But if you create the right partnerships, leverage the type of resources, and have that footing to really connect young people and connect experts and come up with the policy ideas, it is very possible for any size organization, not alone, but in partnership and in conjunction with local and national community, can do stuff like this in their own backyards. And that's why Melissa and I really wanted to take the time to come share this, because we're motivated and excited by seeing just an idea 5 years ago turn into all this and kind of keep going. It gives me goosebumps to even say it, but we're just really excited. But none of this would be possible without the amazing partnerships that we developed along the way. And Patricia was mentioning in a chat I was just reading, our bill sponsor. It's magic when you can find an amazing bill sponsor who is an elected official for all the right reasons and wants to sponsor a bill for all the right reasons. And that's all I'll say about that. So again, yeah, Melissa. This is the rest of the conversation. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, and I just wanted to add, that absolutely, absolutely all of that. And then I think, too, like as a direct service organization, like, of course, as Arash explained at the beginning, that, MPHY's mission is to eliminate homelessness among Nevada's youth. And I'm sure lots of other direct service providers have similar missions that they're working on, right? And so, I think that it's important to think about this from two ways as a direct service organization. If you're deciding to get into this work, or you're, figuring out how much you can devote to this work or whatnot, that I think that, on the one hand, of course, and I think everyone who's a part of this group is already invested in this idea and probably agrees with this, that systems level change is just as critical to this is how we prevent youth homelessness. This is how we sustainably end youth homelessness. This is how we provide young people with the tools and reduce the barriers so young people can exit youth homelessness in a way where they're not going to return to youth homelessness very quickly, things like that, right? So it's just as essential as direct services to creating an ecosystem that can actually support our young people. But even beyond that, all of the things that we've been talking about youth leadership, and it is a service as well. Doing this policy work, like it is providing opportunities for young people to truly be leaders in the community, and definitely working with the young people that we've worked with, for them to be able to participate in something and then be like, I got a law passed. That's a big deal, and to get to know, get to have these opportunities to learn about the process and to be able to, meet with legislators directly and get to know them and learn more about how these things work. And, and including that includes disappointments too, when it doesn't work out, just getting to really see the details of how it works and getting to be part of that action. That's really empowering and exciting. And we see that with our young people. They're very excited about this work of all the kinds of work we do with them. At least I would personally say, I think that they tend to be most excited about this kind of stuff because they really see the change, right? So it's not only, changing the system, but it's also providing a service for young people as well. So definitely, I think, that barrier, thinking of those two things as two opposing things for some reason, as advocacy and policy is one thing and direct services is something else. It's not. They're really one and the same in a lot of ways. So yeah. Arash.
And I think that's what we realize about our mission, which is why we started a movement, and anything to really move that needle, anything and everything we can do is valid for, under the context of direct service, even if it's not a direct service that happens that day in a transactional or other format, but something that changes the ecosystem that allows services to improve is just as critical to our work. And we learned a long time ago that we can keep doing this, for the next 30, 40, 50 years. But if we bring in the systems level side and some policy reform, we can try to move that needle a little faster so we can keep incorporating more of the great ideas everyone has. And with that, we'll shut up. Tamara, your show.
Thank you so much, Arash and Melissa. This has been amazing. I want to open the floor for questions. I have a couple I can start with, but I feel like participants probably have a ton right now. So we'll go ahead and open up the meeting for discussion questions. Hey, Kalima. Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I cannot figure out how to raise my hand. I have to hop off in 3 minutes, but I want to say, really, I'm really impressed with the work that you are doing. A question I have, considering how much you emphasize, which is great, youth voice. And I'm thinking youth is really important when it comes to strategy, especially when it comes to social media strategy. And I see a lot of electeds here in New York respond to youth because they're getting added on Twitter. So if you two could speak to about if you involved or if youth have developed strategies in Nevada, social media strategies, and what role did that play in your advancement in the campaign?
Absolutely. Melissa, do you want to speak to this, and I can also then speak to this, or go ahead.
Yeah. So that's a great point, and I do think that we can increase what the kind that you're talking about, where young people kind of create a critical mass and actually can call out legislators and whatnot and directly address them. I think that we can do even more of that. What we did incorporate into this campaign was that we did work with young people to create videos that then we posted on our social media. So we posted on MPHY's social media, on our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, and then the young people themselves also shared it on their social media as well. So they made, just as with COVID stuff, they basically in their own place with their own phone, they made kind of we worked with them to outline it, and they kind of wrote what they were going to say and all that stuff, and then they filmed a video where it was just kind of them on their phone talking about why this bill was so important to them, and then we took the videos and we blasted them out on our socials, and they blasted it out on their socials. But so that was kind of our social media strategy, and that was kind of more, it definitely, legislators for sure were also a target audience, but it was kind of directed more at the general public to ask them to contact their own legislators. But that is a great point that also definitely I think a lot more can even be leveraged of using social media to actually put pressure and advocate in that way as well. Arash.
That's actually all I was going to say. We did use social media in a certain way, but I wanted to say is that I think that that's very still untapped for us and still a huge resource and potential for us, for anyone doing this work and around youth directly, kind of like what Melissa described, Kalima, like around kind of attacking, calling out, elected officials directly, one-on-one in a very public forum. I think is really important, but we try to provide opportunities besides, social media, because sometimes with social media, we don't want any attacks or other things to happen or whatever. But what we do try to do also is, if they do want to make that comment, social media is great, but we also try to take them down to city council meetings and, county meetings and other venues where they can actually go up and make public comments directly and look people in the eyes and have that recorded by the media, etc. But it's a very good point about using social media to do that times 1,000 at once. So that's a good note for us as well. But I will say also that just, again, we are finding social media to be a huge untapped area, from everything for policy efforts in our realm, but to also high quality direct service in the areas of outreach, and all kinds of other things. So I think it's a really important question and consideration, Kalima.
Tamara, I've got a question. One of our young people PM'd me a question, and if he's feeling a little bit shy about sharing it publicly himself, but he is from Washington State. And so there's kind of two questions. One is there anybody on the meeting right now from Washington who would want to give any updates about any policy efforts that are happening in that state? But then also kind of a follow-up, for a young person in any state who wants to do some policy advocacy, how would you recommend that they might get started? Because they might want to find some allies like you all, like NPHY or other groups. What would be some good steps for a young person to get started on policy advocacy?
Arash, would you like to say?
Sure. So I think, so first of all, I'm not from Washington, so I can't give you that update. I used to live in Lacey, Washington for a little while, but that was like over 30 years ago. So I'm sorry there, but I hope someone can provide that update. But in some of the ways to get involved, I think Patricia nailed on the head. Anything by yourself can be kind of daunting, and you want to create allies, you want to create teams, you want to create networks as well. And I think some of the things that to do there, as well as, I don't know if you had any experience with direct service organizations, but calling those organizations and seeing if they have bodies or groups, or if they're doing this type of work and expressing your interest and wanting to get involved in that. I think that also there's many other sort of advocacy and leadership groups that are youth focused, that are happening in communities. For example, local policy councils, local PACs and different sort of action bodies, youth networks, etc., that are within the homelessness space, but also beyond. But also something that I'm hoping that we can bring to the table at NPHY eventually is another route that I recommend, is that most states have a youth component of their legislative body, whether it's informal or formal. They usually exist. And this is a great way to get right into the ring right away and learn about policy, not from a perspective of the type of change you want to make, but how the change happens and what happens in the field, on the zone, on the ground. And sometimes participating in youth legislatures and things like that can really kind of help position you and create other type of allies and other like-minded individuals that you can create a coalition with of your own if one doesn't exist. And that's my last piece of advice. Don't let anything that we just said about building allies and networks deter you from doing something as well, because sometimes it takes someone to take on that leadership role and find other people to be part of your network and whatever change and action you want to make, and making that happen. So I would suggest some of those things as a way to potentially get started. Melissa?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, all of that. And then, I think that, ever since HUD announced, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program grants, many communities have created youth action boards in response to that. And so obviously, different youth action boards focus on different things or operate in different ways and all of that. But if you live in a community inside Washington that has created a youth action board, whether it's through that funding opportunity or not, that's a great place to start. They all have different names and whatnot, but hopefully by Googling Youth Action Board or something like that, you could see if that is an option. And then I know that Washington State also, and also have no experience in Washington, so not sure like where you are, where these things are, but I know that Washington State does have some youth advocacy groups. I know the Mockingbird Society is one, and that, you know, there are a few. So definitely Googling, you know, like youth advocacy groups, Washington, or the specific area in Washington that you're in could be great. Or if anybody knows of anything more specific as well, providing that in the chat right now would be great. But yeah, definitely. And I think just like Arash said, I think looking for whether it's, and you know, there's groups of different, like there's groups that specifically do homelessness policy. There's groups that do foster care policy. There's groups that, you know, do university student policy or whatnot. So if there's like, you could look at a variety of different approaches. I don't know if you have a specific topic area you'd really like to focus on, or if you kind of just want to get involved in policy advocacy for young people in general, you could look at kind of any of those different types of, or whether it's LGBTQ or other stuff, like there's a lot of different kinds of advocacy groups that maybe you could join. So definitely I would just kind of check that out. And then, yeah, if anybody has anything more specific to share, please do.
Well, I was just going to say, I know Schoolhouse has a youth engagement component, National Network for Youth.
Yeah.
There's many other like great organizations, both in communities and on a national level, that are increasingly engaging and creating, you know, sustainable forums for youth engagement around this and youth leadership around this. So definitely encourage you to check all that out. And obviously any questions can ask any of us too.
So I'll add a question. Did you all learn any lessons from this past legislative session, given that we're still in the pandemic, that you would like to take with you in future legislative sessions? Or was it just kind of adapting in the moment, getting used to, you know, the different technology and virtual meetings, that sort of thing?
I think for me, one thing that really was important, actually for both of ours, and I don't want to like stress it too much, but it's really important, is, and I don't even know if Patricia could speak to this from a different perspective, but is the importance of finding a good bill sponsor. You could have a great idea, you could have everything right in the process, but if you do not have a go-getter, you know, someone who really will come to the bat, someone that will understand the law, not just transfer it over to someone that will not leave you hanging dry if it becomes challenging or complex, or if the other side of the aisle tries to make this an issue that it's not, that someone that will actually go, that has access to people and offices and things in the state legislative building that you don't, to go in there and have those conversations and drive the success of your bill as much as you want it. Though that's a really critical part, and something that became really important during COVID. And why? Is because when we saw during COVID that there was a lot of desperation going on legislatively. There was, one, people knocking on the doors trying to get bills in, but two, legislators were like let's just say they had a lot going on and they were running around at 1,000,000 miles an hour trying to figure everything out and getting all kinds of requests and things from them. So we saw others take really great ideas, but because the bill sponsors had either overcommitted themselves, over leveraged themselves, or whatever the case may be, the bills failed, not because it couldn't have been successful, but because it wasn't driven well internally. So I think that's something really important to note. Another thing is just having a good idea is one thing, but knowing the timing legislatively is another really good idea. So just because you have a good idea, you want to, or a series of good ideas, you want to play chess and you want to think about which one's going to have the biggest impact, or the biggest monetary note, or the biggest opposition, which ones will relate to each other. So you can try to build some sort of momentum between legislative cycles as well. So you're not just doing kind of like one hit, you know, one-offs, but are actually building traction and building a rapport, because then people will know, oh, they're coming back, they've already done this, this, and this, they're very well positioned to talk about this area, we should listen even more than the first or second time. So those are some of the things I observed in this legislative session particularly that we're going to keep with us.
Thank you. And I just have a quick follow-up question. I know SchoolHouse Connection sometimes uses lobbyists to kind of understand the dynamics that are happening within that specific state legislature. Did you all work with lobbyists for this past campaign, or what
Interestingly,
yeah, sorry.
I'll let Melissa answer this one. This is an interesting one.
Oh, no, you go ahead and answer.
Okay, well, I'll just say that no, we have not worked with lobbyists directly. We didn't work with the lobbyists last time, and we did not work with a lobbyist this time externally. However, due to MPHY's increasing role and sort of direct, policy and advocacy, and in our community, some of the laws around how to access legislators, et cetera, all changed during COVID, et cetera. So Melissa and I took it upon ourselves to register as nonprofit lobbyists for our own organization, simply to cut through some of the red tape. So I guess by virtue, we worked with each other, who I guess we were lobbyists for 120 days, but no, not really. We do not work. That was just to make sure we don't have any issues with laws or regulatory stuff. But we have thought about, as we kind of double down and do more of this work, the importance of leveraging lobbyists to have even more of an impact and a broader impact and a more expeditious of an impact. So a lot of this have been internal demonstrations for us too, so we can better align our mission and better align some of our operations and some short and medium term goals. And one of our ideas is to bring in more legal expertise and definitely to work with lobbyists, whether that's one we have internally or split among several like-minded organizations to use to achieve common change. These are some effective ways to access a lobbyist, even if you're a small budget organization.
And just to add to that, because this might be something that people are thinking, is that so yeah, we've never contracted with a lobbyist and never hired a lobbyist. We didn't really even collaborate with a lobbyist this time, but yeah, exactly. And it was, as Arash mentioned, it was because of COVID. Nevada changed the law that if you even had one virtual meeting with a legislator where you advocated for a bill, you had to register as a lobbyist. So we kind of had to because of the law. However, so people might be wondering, you're a direct service organization, you're funded by grants probably, like, how are you a lobbyist or whatever? So something I just want to share about that, right, is that obviously we're very, very careful about that. And so it's very important, of course, obviously, if you are funded by the government, to not use government funded staff time for lobbying, right? And so the way that we have done that is that Arash and I both are, well, depending on us, but we're not exactly direct service people. We do direct service type things as well, but we of course have are partially allocated, whether we are partially allocated to grants or not. Like, we made sure that the time that we're spending on policy work that is lobbying related is not coming out of any government grant time, and document that appropriately. So it's not that you can't do it at all. It's just that you just have to do it in the right way, with the right time, with the right funding, largely unrestricted funding, and to do it in a way and follow all of the rules, and follow all the rules when it comes time for 990s and all that stuff. So just emphasize that it doesn't mean just because you're direct service you can't do it, but you can't do it with government funded staff time, and you have to do it appropriately or whatnot. So yeah, just to share.
Yes, that's very important.
We have another question for you guys in the chat. And actually this you all can start, and then if others want to chime in about their own experience. But the question is, curious if NPHY or others faced opposition to their bill, and if so, how did you address it?
Melissa, you'll answer this more politically correct than I would, so please.
I'll start and then you can add. So no, I actually was thinking about addressing this in an earlier question, and I saw this come in the chat, so I was waiting for this to come up. So yeah, I think that, so I want to share something. With our first bill that we did, that bill was, a bill to break down barriers, like we mentioned already, to identification documents. And we basically encountered no opposition to that bill. That bill went in very smoothly. And at the end of the day, there were a variety of circumstances at play, but in general, that bill, the major factors we experienced with that bill, the closest thing to opposition was that the DMV gave us a very extremely high fiscal note that was absurd, and said the bill would cost the state millions and millions of dollars every year. And so we went back to them and kind of worked with them to show them why their calculations were just not correct in any way, shape, or form. And so we basically had to lobby the DMV to change their fiscal note and reduce it significantly to be more accurate. And so we did successfully do that. But once we did that, the bill actually passed unanimously through the legislature. So however, this year, with our healthcare access bill, we did face significant opposition. And I want to share something, because I was thinking about this when we were talking about youth involvement, right? And that, you know, so I'll just say that the opposition that we faced was party line opposition. So, and when we faced that opposition, you know, a lot of our young people were really discouraged, right? And we're like, oh, this sucks. Like, why don't they see what we're trying to do? And like, why don't they see what we're accomplishing? Why don't they see the real purpose? And they're like miring this and all these things that are unrelated, and, you know, focusing on all of these, they don't understand the actual issue or the problem. And, you know, and totally understandably, they were very upset. It's very upsetting. But I think that it's important, you know, I think it's important to show, well, one, you know, even though we did face that opposition, we were successful and the law passed and the law is on the books, right? And I think that just because you face opposition doesn't mean that you're doing something bad or that it's not worth doing. To be honest, I kind of think that if you face opposition, it shows you're doing something that's needed to be done. But I think, you know, I think that it's facing opposition isn't necessarily, a bad thing entirely, and can, you know, create more work of, you know, building a coalition and do, you know, but that also relates to knowing the political environment that you're going into. Here in Nevada and this session, we had a one-party control in both chambers. And we knew that it was the party that would be more likely to support this bill. And only because we had party line support and that we had one party was in the majority in both chambers did this bill pass. So if it were in a different situation, it would have been very difficult. And the opposition was in some ways expected, but in some ways unexpected, because a lot of the opposition was, they were kind of saying that the bill would have impacts that it was very clear it would not. And we worked with legal teams to provide information, like the legislature's own legal team provided input to show that it would not affect things the way that they were saying it would affect. And we also, you know, got other testimony to show that the unintended consequences that they were kind of saying would happen wouldn't happen. And our sponsor was very, very involved in that and very supportive of that. Another reason why it's so important to have a sponsor. So yeah, you know, we did face opposition, and we dealt with that opposition, and we worked with the young people to face that opposition in a way that worked out. But yeah, Arash.
Two things. One, if we did not have the dynamics we had around, you know, the parties being in our favor, et cetera, we would have probably, if this wouldn't have passed, we probably would have went on a very kind of like Kamala was suggesting about social media. We probably would have took a very strong and public stance in calling out what we saw. And I'm glad Melissa answered that question because she gave a much better answer than I would, but I'm just going to keep it real for a second and just say that what we saw was literally, I mean, I don't want to get started in city politics, but I'll say is that we saw lies. We saw like intentional creation of confusion for our bill. We outright saw people who have elected officials who by profession could not possibly disagree. We had medical doctors that were on this side of the aisle that at first were like, this is the most amazing bill. I personally was an emergency room doctor and dealt with this scenario so many times myself. And then halfway through the process, she started bashing the bill, saying this is horrible, this is a parents' right issue, this is going to create more sex trafficking, all these like just crazy things that were untrue and that we could prove were untrue. And they still spouted out this false narrative to literally just create confusion. But again, that's why the bill sponsor is good, because we can call the bill sponsor where we're like, oh my God, what just happened? And he can, or they can very easily sort of position it into one of two things. It's either just like empty words that they have to say for their, you know, constituents or their base or whatever, and don't worry about it, ignore it, it's done. Or two, this is actually something to worry about. And then that is when we had an amazing bill sponsor that actually used the internal legal research capacities that the state had to actually prove wrong the other side who was making false statements. But the other side went as far as putting out a press release that literally tried to say our organization was creating a law that made it easier for sex traffickers to steal kids from parents, which is just crazy. But anyway, so I was just keeping it real for a second. That's some of the opposition that we sort of had to deal with in this session with this bill. But like Melissa said, some of it was expected, but the insane lies at a party line level sort of division that we saw at the state level were a little unexpected. Melissa, it seems like you're going to spark something for you there.
No, yeah, and I think some of this is, you can talk about this philosophically and get off on that, but like to not get off on that tangent. I think that at the end of the day, right, it's kind of about keeping your eye on the prize, right? And it was just like I saw Patricia said in the chat, it can be really, it really can be heartbreaking when these really aren't related to the bill, and these are bigger political and partisan issues, and it is really heartbreaking. And knowing that people are going out of their way to try to prevent young people from accessing life-saving care because of these partisan issues. It truly is heartbreaking. And I don't want to undermine that in any way. And our young people have every right and should be upset by that in every way. But I think that in doing the work to try to make the change, like it was important for us, or at least for me, to just keep my eye on the prize, or else it would have been too discouraging. It would have been too discouraging and too heartbreaking and too difficult, because they were really, it's true, we were accused of helping sex traffickers, and in the release that went out about that, they cited our own stuff against us. There was articles about how our work, how we serve young people experiencing sex trafficking, and they cited it as if they didn't realize it was us saying this is what you should be doing, and it was us. So there's a lot of and there was a lot of a lot of the opposition had to do with how this relates to abortion. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't relate to abortion in Nevada, because years ago there was already basically, not to fully get into it, but this is an example of what Arash is saying, is that there was just straight up lying that we were dealing with, because in Nevada there was a separate law about parental notification for abortions. There is no parental consent required in Nevada for minors to undergo abortion. And in the 90s, there was a law that was passed to require parental notification, and it was ruled unconstitutional in the courts. And so accordingly, this law has it's totally different. It's in a totally different part of the NRS, has nothing to do with abortion in any way. And the legal team explained that this has nothing to do with abortion, but yet every time we presented the bill, somebody stood up and said, I can't support this bill because it allows minors to have abortions, which already is the exact way it is and is unrelated. So there was a lot of, we were dealing with a lot of misinformation and just kind of wild things about, that we're helping sex traffickers. And, and it's very weird being the people on the ground doing this work to see literally how this law is the exact opposite of that, how this is connecting people to professionals who, if that's the situation, can now provide young people the resources they need to get out of those situations, because they're actually being able to see them. That's the complete opposite. But it was very frustrating, and we did our best to show the facts and but at the end of the day, the work was to get the bill passed, and not to necessarily change the hearts and minds of an entire political party in one session in a way that was just impossible to do. So we worked on getting the bill passed, and we got it passed. And so I think, it's important to keep the eye on the prize and not get too discouraged by having to face opposition.
And I think Tamara,
yes.
Tamara, yeah. I think one thing earlier when you asked, what takeaways do we have from this session or something, I think that's another one that I would add is not only just having a plan for the opposition from what to say and how to say it, but also the ability to get that word out there. Like when some of these people locally on the ground made lies, they had the positioning and the platforms to get out their letter immediately and be read by tens of thousands of people in their own party, et cetera, very easily. It was sent out by the highest level state official representing a party. So we have to, in the future, figure out how we can respond to that at similar order of magnitude, how we can say, no, actually you're wrong, this is this, this is this, and actually get that out there. Because what I saw in this session and what I'm seeing in more of a macro version throughout our country is how quickly misinformation is spreading, and there's no way to kind of stop it. So we just saw it even with a medical access rights bill for young people experiencing homelessness, somehow got dragged into all that as well. So we definitely have to work on strategies for how we can have a bigger platform if things aren't going smoothly or we're facing a lot of opposition during a legislative cycle. Because back to what someone said earlier, I think getting youth voice and other youth in media could be an influence in legislative cycle too. Sorry, we talked too much.
No, that was great. That was really great. And I think, well, I'll ask Lisa, because Lisa, this was your question. Did you get what you need from those responses?
That was terrifically helpful. Thank you. I think that was great. I'm curious to hear at some point when we're not all on a big Zoom call, some of the additional details, but this is really, really helpful for now.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, because that's a real choice, right? To address that, like, or to not address that, because, you know, one thing I would imagine is true of your law is you could access abortion, but not prenatal care, right? But I don't know if you want to make those kind of arguments, or if you just want to like not engage. And I don't know if that's a question for you or Patricia, but like, that's a really hard decision, and maybe it's case by case.
I think that really depends on the political environment, and that's kind of, we didn't engage nearly as much as we could have. And we, that was a strategic, I mean, and obviously, like Arash, we really leaned on our bill sponsor to really, you know, let us know what he thought was the best approach and all that stuff. But because we thought there was a lot of things we could have done to address what they were saying. And we chose not to, because we felt that the bill had a better chance of just passing the way we were approaching it. And so we addressed it a little bit, like when it got brought up, it was addressed a bit, but more factually. It was addressed very factually. Like, it was all, the response was always like, legally, this has nothing to do with this, but this does not do this. Like, we approached it very factually. We didn't approach it from like arguing of how absurd the concept is that they're saying it promotes sex trafficking and all, like we didn't like get into the full on like political like fight, because strategically it seemed that would only cause more attention to it and get people to focus more on the negative, and that because we were confident in knowing the majority were going to vote for it, we didn't do that. But I think it really, really depends on the context and the situation.
Like Melissa said, we sort of just kept our eye on the prize, and the prize wasn't to win, you know, a political debate at the time. The prize was to get this law passed, and we knew we had to make certain sacrifices. And it's true, it was a very difficult choice to stay shut up when people are spewing out horrendous things and attaching your personal name and you know, your agency's name to these statements. But it was in the interest of playing chess to get this thing passed. And that's what we wanted to do. So sometimes those sacrifices have to be made. But that's why I said earlier, if it wouldn't have passed, I think we would have probably deployed some strategies there.
And I mean, because that more of that started happening between the bill was introduced as an assembly bill. So during the assembly committee presentation, that stuff wasn't really coming up yet at all. But by the time we got to the Senate side, that stuff was coming up. And so something else that did occur was that there were some like public comments by some progressive groups that we didn't approach them. They came on their own, and they did kind of directly address like some of what was being said and whatnot. And so they did. So there were people who did come in public comment and talk about how absurd those things were and more directly address them, but we didn't do that. It was more other people that did that.
And I guess I would say that finding other people sometimes is good if you have a long-term policy horizon too, you know, to kind of help with some of this stuff as well, because you at some point, the legislative dynamics were in our favor this way in terms of, you know, party membership. But if they're not in the future, you know, we'd have to be conscious that possibly see some of those same people as well.
Yeah. And, you know, I think another thing too, like, you know, it's also kind of difficult, right? Because I think we've kind of like talked a little bit about what was in our bill, but we haven't really gone into the details of what actually was in it, because we're more talking about the process. But just to be clear, like, so it was already legal for unaccompanied minors to access medical care in Nevada, but it was that they had to wait 4 months, and it was specifically only to like physical healthcare with like physicians and hospitals exclusively, and it's there was no clear way for the medical provider to know if the youth truly was unaccompanied. So therefore they felt uncomfortable providing the services because they didn't know how to like protect themselves from liability. The bill didn't explain at all how they could tell if a minor was unaccompanied. So basically what we did was we got rid of the 4-month wait period. We expanded it beyond physical healthcare to include all providers of healthcare. So including like PAs and nurses, because a lot of our youth are seeing PAs and nurses. I mean, a lot of us in general are seeing, you know, PAs and nurses and whatnot. So got added that. We also, you know, expanded it to dental and behavioral health and mental health and, you know, all other kinds. So we expanded that. And then we created a process mimicking the federal financial aid process of, you know, here's the youth can get a letter from a nonprofit provider, can get a letter from a school, can get a letter from, all these different kinds of groups to show that they're unaccompanied. And then the doctor can easily just put that in the file and be like, I'm good, I can serve this youth or whatever. So it really was just strengthening law that already existed. And we still got the feedback that by doing this, it was, doing all these other things. So that's also where it gets kind of difficult, right? Because again, it's not really, it's not necessarily real opposition. It's kind of created opposition or something, because it's not about the actual changes that are happening, and it's not about what existed before. It's kind of coming from somewhere else. So yeah, just more context there.
Melissa, Arash, thank you all so much. We are at the 3:30 hour, so I don't want to hold folks super long. But thank you so much for just, I feel like you just shared such great information. So we really appreciate this. Thank you to everyone who has joined today's session. As Patricia noted in the chat, if you're interested in continuing this conversation, learning about different resources, please join our state policy Facebook group. She left a link to the group in the chat. And keep an eye out for the registration link for our next session, which will take place in September. And if I just quickly share my screen for this last portion, and then we can log off. So I just want to share that Schoolhouse Connection is launching our Education Leads Home 2022 in March of next year, March 7th and 8th in Austin, Texas. This is a national convening on student homelessness. And what is so unique and special about this convening is that we have a focus on cross-sector collaboration. So having liaisons as well as, let's say, a high school counselor and another service provider that's actually addressing an issue that's impacting young people who are homeless from the early childhood space all the way up to higher ed. So please keep a lookout for that. If you are interested in presenting, we would love to have you submit your proposals and information at the website that's listed at the bottom of the slide, and to register yourself and your team. So I will stop sharing there. If there are any other questions that you all have, please feel free to send myself or and we just look forward to meeting with you all at our next session. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Arash and Melissa.
Thank you, Patricia.